In this video, I will show you some ways in which we can use the JavaScript functions to our advantage. JavaScript functions are higher order functions, which means that we have the flexibility to do a lot more than what other programming languages may not provide. If you have intricate knowledge about the functions in JS, then not only you can design your code in ways you never knew would be possible, but it can also help you save your skin in those tricky JavaScript interviews as well. So let's just dive directly into some of the use cases in the form of code examples, and hopefully you will be able to better your understanding about the functions in JavaScript. So first is the normal way in which we can use a JavaScript function. Let's just call it normal use. So normally we create a function and then we provide a name for it. And within this function, we do something like logging something to the console. So console.log and then do something. We can create more functions like this and we can call them whenever we need to. So this is the normal use, right? I mean, nothing fancy about it. Now there is another way in which we can use the JavaScript functions, and that is assigning them to a variable. To do that, we can declare a variable. Let's just call it do something func, and then we can directly assign the function to it. Now to do that, we can directly provide the function definition, but instead of providing the name, we just have to provide the function keyword because the name is already there, which has the reference of this function. To call this function which has been assigned to this variable, we just have to treat this variable as a function and then just call it normally. The use of this approach, using a variable to store the reference of a function, is when we don't know which function we need to call, and this depends on some kind of condition or the state in which the program is currently in. For example, suppose that there is a condition. Let's set the default reference of the function for this variable with this value, do something function. Now if this condition is true, then we can change the function which has been assigned to this variable. So we can do something like this. So you can see when this condition is true, then we are assigning a different function as a reference to this variable, and then eventually we can call this function. So it all depends on this condition which function is actually going to get called. If this is false, then this function will be called do something, otherwise do something else is going to be called. This is how we can use variables to switch between different functions when we don't really know which one to call when the program is executing. The third use is we can return a function from other functions as a return value. To do this, all we need to do is to have a function and then return another function using the return keyword from that function. Now to call this function, the one which is being returned, first we have to call the parent function, and then this entire expression is going to be evaluated into the function which is being returned, which is this one. So to call this function, we again have to write this opening and closing parenthesis, and in this way we can call the function which is being returned from over here. You can see in the console that do something is being called first, and then the function which is being returned is being executed after that, and the message which is contained within that returning function is being printed to the console. Next one is using a function as an argument and passing it to other functions. So what this simply means is we can use a function as an argument and we can provide that function as an argument to other functions. The function to which the argument is being passed can then use the arguments as normal functions and then do stuff with them. For example, let's just create two functions to get two numbers, number 1 and number 2. Now we can create another function. Let's just call it getSum, and within this getSum function we can have arguments. So get number 1 func and get number 2 func. So it means that these two arguments are meant to be functions, and then we can simply get the sum by calling these two functions. So return get number 1 func executed, and then adding get number 2 func's result to it. Now to call this getSum, all we need to do is to provide these two functions as arguments, and that's it. But to see the result, we need to do something, and for that I am going to log the result to the console. So console.log. You can see that 20 is being printed over here in the console. So this is how you can send and use the functions as arguments to another function. There are some other flavors which I want to show you, and you will see how we can use the JavaScript functions in some more ways. The first one is called as immediately invoked function expression, or in short IIFE. What this simply means is the function will be invoked as soon as the JavaScript will pass the function definition, and for that we need to do this. Just write two opening and closing parenthesis pairs, and then within the first one provide the function definition. Like over here, I'm going to write a message to the console. This is a self executing function. You can see in the console that the message is being printed even though we are not executing this function explicitly. We are just executing it as soon as the browser has done parsing it. So what is the actual utility of this self-executing function? Well, if you don't already know, all the libraries out there use the self-executing functions to add the reference of their functions or their wrapping object to the main window object of the browser. Something like this. Over here you can see that when this function is being immediately invoked, then we are providing the window object as an argument, and in the end of this function's execution, this obj object is simply being added to the window object as a new property, so that any code which can access the window property can directly access this obj object. Another way to create a function is by creating a arrow function by using the arrow operator. So what we can do is we can create a new function like this. Let func equals to arrow operator, and then let's just write something to the console. This is kind of a shorthand approach to creating a normal function, but still the function created by using the arrow operator is different from a normal function, and you can learn more about the arrow functions in another one of my video. You can find the link of that video in the description if you are interested to learn more about the arrow functions, how they are created, and what are the differences between a normal function and an arrow function. Over here we can simply call this function as a normal function, and the code which is within this function will execute. We can also use an arrow function like an immediately invoked function expression. So we can do something like this, and this will be perfectly valid. But again, there are differences between a normal function and an arrow function, so you need to check those as well if you need a normal function or an arrow function. The last one for this video that I'm going to talk about is putting the function in an array or using functions as array items. So let's just create a normal array, and what we can do is we can provide functions as array items. So it can either be a normal function or an arrow function to further reduce the code content. Let's just add some more array items, like let's say another function, and then let's also add another item which is not really a function. Now I'm going to iterate over each of the items of this array, and if the current item is a function, then I'm going to execute it. For that I'm going to use the for each function, and within this for each function, let's create a function which is going to be called for each of the array item. So the first argument is going to be the value. Now to execute the functions contained inside this array, first we need to check if the current item is a function or not, because as you can see the last one is a number and not a function. So to do that I'm just going to check the type. So if type of val is a function, then simply execute val as a function. Now let's check the browser console, what is being printed over there. You can see that function1 and function2 is being printed, and no exception is being raised because the val is not being treated as a function when it comes to this last item, which is a number. There is another way in which we can use the JS functions, and that is by creating asynchronous functions. Now the topic of asynchronous functions in JavaScript is very extensive and it needs an entire video to cover it. I have actually created a video in the past on the async functions in JavaScript. You can find its link in the description if you want to learn more about them. So these were many of the different ways in which we can use JavaScript functions. I hope that this video will better your understanding if you don't already know about these. Have any questions? Feel free to use the comments area or join the CodeFirst Discord server. The link is given in the description. Finally, if you like the video, then please don't forget to place a like on it and also subscribe to the CodeFirst channel if you haven't done that already. I am Nitij and I will see you next time.